So, welcome everybody to the Edge Rowing Podcast. Super excited today to have our guest, Lindsay Dare Shoop. Lindsay, for anybody in the US rowing world, I think will have seen her around or know the name. Um, you know, former Olympian, world champion, world record holder, author, coach. Probably easier if I just say the things that you haven't done in the rowing world, maybe. But
Won a medal sculling.
yeah, there
That
we
was like
go.
the thing on the bucket list. I wanted to win, I guess I had to compete. I know, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe if you did compete, you would have got it. So we'll just make that assumption. But yeah,
Right on.
Lindsay, thank you so much for making the time today, and yeah, just excited to hear more about you and your story.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to having this conversation because, you never know where the curiosity takes you in the conversation. There's always something new that comes out that maybe I hadn't thought of or you hadn't thought of before. And so it makes for a really fun kind of back and forth. I love learning throughout this whole process. So
Of
thanks
course.
again for having me out here.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you for sure. So, Lindsay, normally like what I like to understand first is what was your kind of initial steps into the rowing world? So I know you started off, you're a former basketball player.
Yeah.
You'd stopped the sport, like lost your drive for it, and then found rowing. So could you maybe take us back to what that part of your life looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I was 20 years old, so it's been 23 years now, to over 23 years now that I discovered rowing. But I played a bunch of different sports growing up. Like, if you pick a sport, name it, probably I did it at
Oh
some
yeah.
point or another. I always semi-jokingly tell people that I started swimming when I was two because it was that I almost drowned in a lake when I was two. So my
Oh.
parents were like, whoa, swimming lessons, here it is. So started swimming when I was two, started riding horses when I was four, and then grew up. Basketball was my main sport. I started playing that in third grade and then played until I was done with high school. Volleyball was my favorite sport, picked that up in high school. But no matter how good I got at any of the sports that I played, I didn't think I was good enough to play a sport in college because
Hmm.
I grew up just south of Charlottesville, Virginia, and I mean, we're talking 10, 11 miles due south of Charlottesville, Virginia, which is where the University of Virginia is located. And so I grew up watching Virginia athletes, Division One
Oh
Virginia
yeah.
athletes play sports, and I thought, my gosh, they're so big, they're so strong, they're so fast. Those are real athletes, and that was kind of the way that I reflected on them. They're real athletes, and I'm just me because I had gone
Hmm.
to. I mean, Charlottesville's a pretty small town, and so I went to a pretty small school. So I felt like a big fish in a little pond was always the phrase that comes up, at least in my mind at the time. And so when I graduated from high school, I knew that I was going to go to the University of Virginia because it was, if I got in, simply because it was the best school that my parents could afford, because I
Hmm.
didn't assume that I could get a scholarship. That wasn't a thing. Rowing was not a sport there growing up. Like, it was, UVA had a rowing team starting, a club team starting in the, well, I guess a while back, but a club team, old but small. And then it started to grow, especially in the mid 90s, when women's rowing became an NCAA sanctioned sport. It was the mid 90s that rowing, kind of like 1996, 97, at Virginia, kind of took hold. But again, I had never played it before, never done it before. So it wasn't something that was on my radar of like, oh, let me
Hmm.
go to Virginia and start rowing. But I had known, my mom actually cleaned the head coach of UVA at the time, who just retired this past May. She cleaned his teeth. And so, they had conversations. He moved there in 1988. I would have been 6 or 7 years old at the time, but they'd had conversations about me over the years until finally one day she told him that I was a little over 6 feet tall,
Oh
even
yeah.
though even though my confidence had me standing at like 5'10" most of the
Yeah.
time, you know. But when he heard that, the way that he puts it is he's like, "What?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Having
Yeah.
known that, I was athletic and that I was tall, it was literally simply those two things that he was like, "She should try rowing if she goes
Hmm.
to UVA." So I had met him, and his nickname since at least the 80s, and Kevin Sauer, people know his name. For as much as you say people know my name in US rowing, like, you say Kevin Sauer, people know who that is. And his nickname still is to this day K Train, because even at 71 years old, he's built like a freight train.
Oh
He is
yeah.
this strong,
And clean teeth.
honestly, good and very clean teeth, solid
Yeah.
clean teeth. Yeah, good teeth. but this very strong man. And I remember thinking that his pecs were like
Oh yeah.
Superman pecs out to here. And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just, and so I had actually met him when I was graduating high school. And he said, if you go to Virginia, you should think about rowing.
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, crazy man. People don't just do that,
So, and had you
right?
stopped, had you stopped kind of basketball then?
I had stopped playing basketball at that point because when I graduated from high school, like I said, I didn't think I was good enough to play a sport in college. And so I actually got into UVA academically on my own,
Nice
had
one.
already gone to Virginia. And I met him when I was in high school once that I remember. And then for 2.5 years, my first 2.5 years at UVA, I basically wasn't playing sports. I was playing some club rec volleyball, but then over time, it didn't take long for my grades to start to decline, my weight to start to go up, my staying up all night, the social meandering of like this, what do I do with my life without
Hmm.
sports, and let alone with just my life in general. And lo and behold, all the 2.5 years later, I randomly bumped into Kevin on campus one day. And I mean, this is a whole story that I write about in my book because it's so uncanny that it was I've since come to say that my life has become a series of serendipitous moments because everything I can attribute to all this wonderful path that my life, for all the ups and downs that I've gone through since this moment, I track it back to this moment of
Oh
bumping into
yeah.
Kevin on campus. Yeah. And the thing is, I bumped into him because he knew who I was. I kind of knew who he was. I hadn't seen the man in I don't know how long, but the first words out of his mouth were, "Hey, Lindsay, it's never too late to row." Not like,
Yeah.
"Your mom cleaned my teeth last week or last month," or "How have you been?" It was just straight
Sounds
into,
like a rowing
it's
coach.
never too late to row. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And he is someone who so many athletes, when he retired, people sent in 60-second clips. 60 seconds was kind of hard for me, but 60 seconds
Yeah.
clips, just a little soundbite about him and his career, and the repeated themes over and over again that came up about him as a coach was he took a chance on me, he believed in me,
Mm.
he taught me to believe in myself, right? And then
Yeah.
and then little things like it's all about the team, find a way or make one. Just this is the type of person that he was. And so go ahead. Yeah,
So
serendipitous.
yeah, no, I'm just curious then, what do you think could be different? Do you think that was a big something holding you back in basketball then? Was that belief, or were there like what element of you thinking that you couldn't do it in basketball was your belief around it, or versus your actual kind of hard facts on your points or what your actual potential was?
Yeah, that's a really good point because I was thinking about that, or a really good question, because I was actually thinking about that last week. Like, what was the difference between 17-year-old me, who actually, by the time I turned 17, from my junior year to senior year in high school, I actually kind of flipped a switch and became much more aggressive than I had been in the
Oh yeah.
past. Yeah, but just because it was such a short season, it's only a few months, right? When you're playing high school basketball, I had played, AAU basketball in the past. I'd played on a couple of different teams at a time, but at that point in my age in my career, I was playing for my high school team and not traveling with the AAU team at the time. And so it was only a few months, and even with each game that I could score a bunch of points, pull down all the rebounds, ace the ball in volleyball, like have all these like tangible things that were saying I was getting better, there was just something about, okay, those external measures weren't enough to kind of trigger
Right.
greater confidence. And part of it could have just been the duration, like it wasn't a long enough process for me to really feel confident in that
Mm-hmm.
accumulation of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or, yeah, so whereas in rowing, there was, it was a higher level. Um, when I got into it, I was at the very bottom. I was very slow. I was overweight. I was 30 pounds heavier than I had been in when I left high school. I hated running at the time. We ran a lot, right? As that was part of the rowing process was you got to run.
Yeah.
But then I think because even just the beginning of the season, before we even had our first race, was basically about 3 months of time, maybe a little bit more, where I had all that tangible evidence of day to day on the erg, day to day in the weight room, day to day
Yeah.
on running, and I'm getting closer to the front group.
Mm.
That that just the preparation for our first race was as long as my senior high school senior basketball season. So perhaps that timeline helped build the confidence. And I would also say that it was the first time because I was one of the tallest people in my high school. And in the 80s and 90s, clothes didn't fit. Mostly, I should say in the 90s. I was in high school in the 90s. But clothes, the sleeves were never long enough. The
Mhm.
pants were never long enough. The shoes in my size, I had to wear boys' shoes because they just didn't make them in my size. So I felt really awkward. And because I was this tall, lanky person, and I was kind of the only one like me in my space. And there might have been a few here and there, but not that many. But when I went to the rowing team, there were like 50 people like
Yeah.
me. And it kind of was heartwarming to go, more tall, awkward, lanky people that are actually pretty cool. You know what I mean? So combine that physical progress. I lost probably 20 or 30 pounds in the first couple of months of rowing because of all the physical activity that we were doing, combined with the team that was a group of people that were confident, that were outgoing, that were really positive and happy and uplifting, that were also somewhat physically similar, whether we had we
Hmm.
all looked different, but height wise and
Yeah.
lankiness wise. And that made me feel much more comfortable about being me. And um, I think so. Then you combine the process with time where it's so gradual and it's longer that it's not like trial by fire. You're given that time to gradually progress so that confidence really can be so much more embedded in you.
Hmm.
Then you couple the teammates that are helping build you up every day, even though they're, you know, kicking your butt up the hill, that still is they're doing it in a positive way that's, building you up. And then you add Kevin in there from the coach standpoint, who just has this relentless positivity and belief in what you can be when you just give a little more of yourself and really believe that great things are possible. Not that I am going to be this great thing, but that it's possible that I
Hmm.
could be, right? And there's a difference there. And it's that possibility that is the biggest difference, I think. And that's something that he has always instilled in the athletes and never one, but the collective, which is really a really cool thing to be kind of nurtured through as far as environmental influences.
Right. So that start of that belief that in yourself, was it a belief or that possibility, was
Yeah.
that you could be good in that crew, or was that because I mean your record, what was it? You were in the US team within 4 years or something, or world champion within
3D.
4 years?
Yeah.
3 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like did you have that belief there, or was it just that you could like talk me through that kind of what that time
Yeah.
frame looked like?
Yeah. So when I first started, the biggest thing was that so high school, the lowest grade that I got in high school was a B plus in history. I didn't like to read at the time, hence the irony of being a writer and an avid, a voracious reader now. I love reading, I love audiobooks, I love writing, I'm making up for lost time, I think. But, history was the lowest grade that I got, B plus. So I was basically an A student. And then I went all the way down to C minuses without sports. And I gained 30
Oh, really?
pounds.
Right.
Yeah. And I was socially withdrawing. As soon as I started rowing, I didn't never missed class again, right? Because it was just I was much more energized, even though it was, classes at 9 in the morning and practices certainly before that. But I started to notice these very real things inside myself change because of all of these things, having the team, having the purpose, being physically more active, being outside, being by the water. Those are all things that rowing provides. And so what I noticed was that my weight came down, my grades shot up, I had more energy, my positive affect was back because I'm a glass half full kind of person. And that's who I always was. And so when I left sports, I was in this lull that was not me. And I knew it and I just didn't know how to fix it. I even woke up in the middle of the night before I bumped into Kevin and said, I wish I had done crew. I wish I were not a lazy
The night
bum.
before,
Then
wow.
yeah, like then I wouldn't be such a late. And then this is like a condensed version of the line. But and that's what's riddled throughout the book is all these journal entries of my mindset throughout this entire process from kid age all the way up through the Olympics and beyond it. And it's all throughout the book of exactly what I thought when in that moment. And so, I mean, I literally said, then I might not be such a lazy bum. The world will never know. And that includes me.
Mm,
And then I started rowing.
awesome. So
So
have you been journaling the whole time? Like
the
you
whole
said,
time,
okay. Wow.
and since I was maybe not, I journaled some. I think I started probably consistently around like 9 or 10 years old because my parents made us for a family trip
Oh,
we
right.
took. But the biggest things that I was reflecting on through the book in terms of journaling was I started keeping a journal pretty regularly when I was about 18, when I started college.
I wish I
And
did that. Yeah.
yeah, I exactly right. And and a piece of that too is that I wrote stories. So anything I could remember when I was 18 of my childhood, I started
Oh,
writing
okay.
stories then because I always knew that I wanted to write. I just didn't know what the story really was. And here we have this great story that just happened to have unfolded, and there are more in there. I read a quote once. I think I can't remember who wrote it, but it was something to the effect of anyone who's survived childhood has enough to write a book, right? so so we all go through things,
Yeah,
and
you
the
learn
way
a
that
lot
you
about
kind of
yourself. Yeah.
yeah. But to go back to the confidence question, it was that rowing had righted the ship of my life, and I was at my version of what rock bottom was at that point. And because of that, that's why it drove me. That's why I was so motivated because here I was, I knew what it was like to not feel so great. And here was this thing that if I went all in and poured all this into it physically and mentally and emotionally, then it was paying me back multiplicatively. And so I just followed that and just chased everybody. And lo and behold, in a year, I broke 7 minutes on the erg, right? And so because of that, there's much more to it, of course. And
Hmm. Yeah.
that's why I had to put it all into a book. And there's much more beyond the book. There's like I mentioned earlier, like there is more, at least one more just story oriented. But just the byproduct of wow, look how this is paying me back in my life. Look how I feel. Look how I'm behaving. Look at these awesome people that I get to be around and the things I get to learn from this. And so it was this process of just constant learning that was so exciting and to this day still is. That's why I love coaching so much, why I
Hmm.
love doing commentary so much. When I do commentary, I've gotten to do commentary for the last two Olympics for NBC, which is a phenomenal experience. It's amazing because you get to watch all this really amazing rowing. And it's part of your job to literally digest it, unpack it, cross compare it, see what
Yeah.
people are doing. And now that we can actually see what people are doing because of cameras and live streams, right? It, you know, People are like, it's just so obvious how much you love it. And I don't think I'm intentionally doing it. I'm just talking about this thing that I think is really cool because of what I know that it's done for me over the course of my life. So
Uh,
in that year, I broke seven. Cool. Awesome. Kevin thought I could be pretty good after that. He pitched whatever he did, talked to the national team coaches at the time, and said, hey, this kid could be potentially good. This is how tall she is. She hasn't rowed that long. This is where she is on the machine. Within a year of starting the sport, I became an All American and went to my first national team camp, which at the time was called pre elite, and now it's under 23s. They used to go to the Nations Cup. And so it was just kind of the same part of the system
mhm.
as what U23s is today. Interestingly enough, um, they invited 20 people to this camp, but only 7 people came to the camp
Hmm.
because we weren't going to race. We weren't going to go to a
Okay.
race.
Yeah.
And so it was just training. It was just come to New Jersey and row pairs. And only 7 of us said, hey, cool, that sounds great. Let's do that. Really interesting about that. The very following year, I got invited to a second camp. And this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I swear I'll come back to the question of confidence. The second camp, a few more people got added into it. And same thing happened. 13 people showed up, right? So not everybody was going because there was no guarantee of a race.
Hmm.
And what was really cool about that is that 5 of us ended up making, 6 of us ended up making the national team out of that small group. 4 of us ended up as the heart of the women's eight for the next 5 years. Yeah, 5 years. And so I can't help but think that because we were just the type of people that were just really interested in rowing and wanted to get better at rowing, that we were willing to show up at a camp not knowing if we were going to
Yeah.
get any gear, get to go anywhere, get to go to a race. There was nothing. It was just about learning how to be better at rowing. And lo and behold, we ended up being really, really good at rowing. And what happens when you do that? Well, you start winning some races. Yeah. That genuine curiosity of just wanting to get better, regardless of what it meant in the long run of the carrot down the distance. It was, I just want to get better at this. This is really cool for me. And it resulted in a lot losing first and then a lot of winning right after, very shortly after that, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, even just like showing to a coach and making good impressions that you're willing to do that without any payoff or kind of the flashy stuff, I think is a great way
Yeah.
that a lot of people
Yeah.
can do it, even just in a club or whatever, showing up early to training without the promise of the coach noticing that, then when it does happen,
Yeah.
it can have quite a good impact. What do you think it was specifically about the way that you were approaching your training that had you get such a quick progress into from beginner to sub seven in a year and then beyond that?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
what were you doing specifically that you think gave you
Yeah.
that progress?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, relentlessly going after it. Kevin was just a driver. I remember the first time I went from my first 2K was a 7:58, right? And it was like my fifth day on the team, and I just did with the girl. It was literally like show up on a Saturday in groups of at least three or four, or it might have even been five. You have to have come to a group of five, and then just do a 2K. So I just did what the person next to me did. I didn't know what I was doing, and I think when I got down to about 7:30, 7:35. I have the exact number written in the book because I look back at some old,
Oh.
things. But got down to about a 7:30, maybe it might have been 7:34, and I was so excited that I was in the 7:30s, and I ran over to Kevin and I was like, "Oh my God, like this is what I just did." And he just kind of looks at me and goes, "There is more."
Yeah.
Right? Like this very deep voice that he has. So there were people ahead of me and people behind me, and I walked into a novice program at the University of Virginia, which, in my opinion, we need to bring back a novice experience and a freshman experience, novice on the
Mm.
women's side and freshman on the men's side. Five of us that won in Beijing learned how to row in college. I was 20. I was spring semester junior year. Susan
Mm.
Francie was fall of sophomore year. Like having this experience, five of the guys that won in 2004 in the men's eight, five of those guys learned how to row in college.
Mm.
So as we've started to lose walk-on athletes, because
Oh.
who's good at rowing? Tall, lanky people.
Yeah.
Tall, lanky people are not good at sports when they're young.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what is do you have you seen a correlation? Obviously the US team has still done great this Olympics especially, but have you noticed a correlation between removing that novice program and then the because of what the men's and women's programs were super dominant during the time you were there. So
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and it pulled a lot of people from non-traditional backgrounds where they
yeah,
had different skill sets. And a friend of mine, I played a
interesting.
lot of sport. Yeah, I played at, one of the guys in the men's four this year went to Drexel, right? You go to these small kind of
Interesting.
different programs. One of the women in the pair that got fourth in London in 2012 went to Grand Valley State. Megan Musnicki went to Ithaca. People going to these different programs, these much more diverse, kind of smaller programs that are way out there that are kind of like they
Oh.
might have stumbled into it as a second sport or a walk-on sport. Like it kind of pulled people from a lot of different places rather than we must go to these big schools and that's it. And now with the women's NCAA changing, some of the bigger programs could potentially absorb all the athletes,
Hmm.
right? Which kind of takes away some of the athlete experience. Where if you go to a smaller program or you have a novice program that you walk into, you might get a little bit more attention by the coach, or you'll have a much more diverse upbringing through the sport where, for me, like I said, I played a bunch of different sports. We're talking 10, 12 different sports.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine, I said I didn't specialize. So that filled
Yeah.
in my fit, what they call physical literacy now in terms of skill set, where
Yeah.
I knew how to fall. I knew how to not hurt myself because I could relax when I fell. I knew how to reach. I knew how to crouch. I knew how to move to the sides. And
Yeah.
those are things that we need to fill those gaps. A friend of mine stopped me. She said, "You might not have specialized in a sport, but you did specialize in teams." And that was when I was doing a book club for my book. I thought it was so interesting. And I was like, that really had me thinking. I was like, you spend a lot of time if you play in a lot of different sports, even if you go to a small school, you're having new people come in and out all the time. and working together as a team and figuring that out.
Hmm.
Rowing works very much that way, where every time even one person changes in a boat, it's a slightly different dynamic, depending the smaller the boat, the bigger the difference in the dynamic, but having practiced those skills through other sports, understanding that you only succeed on the team oriented nature of it, that being really deeply rooted in your upbringing through sport period only pays you back even more in a sport like rowing, where then, okay, you have, from a novice standpoint, for instance, or a new to the sport later in life standpoint, you come
Hmm.
in with like a really deeply embedded care of the team. You really, it's fun for you. It's new, so that
Yeah.
novelty makes it fun. You haven't had the time to ingrain bad habits. You potentially have avoided some injury because you've
Yeah.
grown into your system a little better, so that when you are finally given this kind of like gradually larger dose of training, that you can manage it a little bit better. And at that point,
Yeah.
you're probably really interested in it at that point, because if it's not worth your time, you don't have as much time to
Yeah.
invest in it. So,
For sure.
um,
Well, yeah, I got into it like at 18, or no, basically 19.
okay.
And I used to play ice hockey.
Hmm.
And I had a year out of that, and I basically
Mhm.
just went out, did the partying every weekend.
Yeah.
I don't want to say got that out of my
Spring
system,
break
but
in Mexico.
yeah, yeah. Well, we
I
don't
had a
have
couple of
that in
those.
Scotland, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
um, got so sick of it. I was just like every weekend became the same thing, and I was kind of happy that I had that break at 18 where I could realize, look, I want to be involved in a sport, and I want to be
Yeah.
involved heavily in a sport. So it kind of gave me that chance as well to obviously plenty of good junior programs and junior
Yeah.
rowers that come up, but then especially in GB as well. Like I think most the sculling group when I was there had started, at least half of them had started at 18. There's one guy, Callum, he started when he was like 21.
Hmm.
My
Hmm.
inspiration for the sport was Helen Glover, who started when she was
Oh, yeah.
22.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is and it's obviously, yeah, not for a sport that you can start so late and get so good at. If you could
Yeah.
mention in the US that you're removing that opportunity and that avenue for it, then that's a big
Yeah. And there's
problem.
a big gap, right? They're like, oh, there are all these people that row
Hmm.
junior, and then a lot of people come in the masters, but then there's a gap in college. So if
Yeah.
you don't get recruited to a collegiate program now, you don't have the opportunity, at least not as much. Some programs still have a little bit of the opportunity, but the difference is, there were a couple of conferences that still had novice specific racing, where it wasn't a 3V, it was novices. And now with the restructuring of the NCAA even more with the conferences, those conferences, only one of them is still there anymore. So like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 still had novice races at their conference championships. Most of the other conferences moved toward a third varsity eight instead
Mhm.
of, and there's a big difference because you have a bunch of recruited athletes that might never make the varsity eight, and that might not have ever been the intent of why they were recruited to the program, but to have experienced recruited athletes that are third tier on their team try and go against true novices, it's just not the same level of
Mhm.
of challenge to meet the level of confidence yet, because we know
Yeah.
that when it comes to confidence building, the challenge has to be enough of a stretch to
Yeah.
get you, like, to feel like you're within striking distance. Even if you lose, you have to be close. But if the gap is here, the challenge
Yeah.
is too high, you're like, well, it's really
Yeah.
demoralizing when you're trying to learn a sport. So by not leveling that field, so to speak, where people have started within the last couple of months or last year of time, then it really doesn't allow kind of that growth of some we could have some of the best rowers in the country, or even from all over the world for that matter, because a lot of people come to the States for school. Like, they might just have lacked the confidence. They might have gotten right there, but we wouldn't know it because we didn't give them the opportunity to compete at the appropriate level. I competed as a novice at my first conference championships. The
Hmm.
very next
Right.
year, I made the varsity eight the very next year, along with one of my other novice counterparts who was actually a true freshman. She made the varsity eight the very next year. So in less than 2 years, we're sitting in the core of the varsity eight at Virginia. We ended up getting fifth at the national championships that year. And the interesting thing about that is, to go back to the confidence boost, My senior year at Virginia, we lost every single race in our spring season until the ACC championships. And that was when the ACC only had a handful, like four teams in it. So it was a very different conference. It was it was less challenging than what it is now. Um, but we went to the ACC championships. We win that. We go to our regional championships and we won that against programs that had doored us. But the thing was, Kevin never gave up. He knew he had the right people. He just kept moving us around within the boat, trying to figure out like what was the lineup that was it was just this is right. It's just the pieces aren't in the right spot. And every time we lost, we kept going back, kept working hard, and he convinced us that there was still more speed to be had. And we believed him, even though we kept losing and kept losing until it finally worked. And he finally tried one kind of last lineup. And I talk about that whole process in the book. The whole story is there. And we go out at our regional championships, and all of a sudden we were like, holy crap, that just happened. Let's
Hmm.
do this. And we ended up going top five in the varsity eight that year. And that almost exactly mirrored what happened with the national team. And so because it was just like
Yeah.
the coach had our trust. Kevin built he was there with us working in the trenches. He often did workouts with us,
Oh yeah.
sweating. Oh my God, just sopping sweat. And at the time, I was in my 20s, and at the time he was in his 40s, which to a 20-year-old 40s is like, oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
person's so old.
Yeah. Yeah.
That like to see someone like that so invested and so willing to emotionally invest in us, we couldn't not be just as invested.
Hmm.
So then when it came to the national team, it was all about trust development. When I got to the national team, because you said, to go from here to, I started when I was 20. I was sitting, I actually raced two events at my first world championships. And it was the first time, at least to my knowledge, we were told Caroline Lind and I raced the pair, and we were stern pair in the women's eight in 3 years after I started rowing. And so it was the first time, or one of the few times, that two American women had raced two Olympic caliber events at the same world championships. That was kind of the beginning of the doubling up era for the United States, or the attempt at it, at least. And the um, when we made it to Worlds that year, gosh, there were so many things that that happened that year. Like I went from in
Yeah.
the fall leading up to that year, the fall that year, Tom Tahar, who was the coach at the time, actually told Kevin when he came to visit, watching me row a single, Kevin asked him how I was doing, and Tom said that he didn't think it was going to work out for me because I was that slow
Really.
at first. Yeah. And then several months later, raced my way to the top of the matrix and
In
became
a
the
single.
fastest starboard. Well, became the I became one of the faster singles, got up within striking distance, but then I was switched to sweeping and became the fastest starboard
So what
after
did you
almost
do? Like,
4
I'm
months.
interested to hear
Yeah.
what more you were doing in that situation. Like, how are you
Yeah.
going out? Was it just come back to that belief that you're talking about and just staying at it, or, what do you think it is about your approach to rowing that separated you and allowed you to climb the ranks?
Yeah, I always because I always felt like the new person was a part of
Yeah.
it, right? So I always felt like because I was still so new at it, I felt like there was just something that I didn't yet know, right? There was more that I could learn. And when I first started with the national team, and this, part of writing the book too was a true reflection on what the heck changed in the national team system over the last, 15 years. So what has been that adjustment? And so part of that is in there of like, because people over the years are like, what was different about you guys? There was just something different about that era of rowing. And so part of it was an exploration into what was positive about my own experiences, but also what
Mhm.
was really positive about the national team experiences. And it really was a reflection, especially now having coached all the way up. I've coached ages 10 to 84 at this point in my career in the last just under 15 years. And throughout watching all of these things, just the growth and the data orientation of everything. But we're skipping steps in the process. Data's fine, and you might need this stuff to back it up here, but you don't need all the complicated data if you really know what you're looking for. And but we're missing out on the like build the love for the sport, have fun
Mhm.
with it, love racing, love your teammates, be super team oriented, and know why you're doing it. And when that is so deeply embedded in who you are, there is no question when you fumble a little bit because, this kind of something that I started doing years ago was like I used to mountain bike when I was in early on, right? And so, you're mountain biking you're going along and everything's fine. You're going up this hill and then you're going to hit a rock, right? And so I have come to draw this like craggy mountain for teams that I've coached. And where it's like the trajectory is here, even if it's going kind of like
Mhm.
this. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll draw clouds and lightning bolts and rain and big
Yeah.
rocks and stuff. Because ultimately, if you're mountain biking up a hill, and this is literally an anecdote that I talk about in the book, is that if you're biking up a hill, a friend of mine, the first time I went out, she said, when you're going up a hill, like every now and again glance up at the top, but make sure that
Yes.
you're watching what's going on in front of you.
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
just stare, you're going to crash into a hole or hit a rock that's going to like pull out from under you. So you
Yeah.
need to be aware of both things, but more aware of managing this space and then glance every now and again because if you've ever watched someone on a mountain bike, they've downshifted so much that they're like,
Yeah.
and they're going so slowly up this hill that they are moving imperceptibly slowly until they
Hmm.
glance and realize that they're like 6 inches closer. But it's
Yeah.
progress nonetheless. So even when I would have those awful days where I was just like, wow, I am terrible at this. And my erg score is stuck. And for 3 months, I'm doing the same thing on a 30-minute test. How is this possible? And this is also stuff that I talk about in the
Yeah.
book is like, this is reality. You've worked so hard and there's so much that you're pouring into every day, but it's still the same. What's happening?
Yeah.
And knowing that it's exactly that you're climbing this very craggy, challenging hill,
Hmm.
and that you're grateful to even get to be one of these handful of people that get to be here right now. There maybe there weren't at the time. Maybe we were the fools that wanted to be there in that at the time,
No
but it
chance.
was
No.
just it was this like really tough climb that even if the progress was minute, then that was important. And so to put in bullet points, rowing righted the ship of my life. So it was making me a better person and it was allowing me to explore being a better human and a happier human and a fitter human and just a better overall person. I knew that it was super process oriented, so I was very curious about how to get better at it because it's like swimming. You look at it from afar and it seems like everybody's doing the same, but they're not. There's so
Hmm.
much nuance to it. And the idea that like this thing that was making me so much better, I didn't want to give that up no matter the cost. Like I couldn't imagine doing anything else because I had become so much better because of being involved in rowing. And it also, there's luck involved where because of my age, because of, the timeline that I entered into full-time training with the national team, I entered into a point that was the very first Olympic cycle that was a full cycle that Tom Trahar coached. So instead of keeping the 20 or 30 people in the system in one hub, he sent everybody out and said, get a single, here's the training program, make sure you can cross train and lift weights, and do what you need to do. So he literally just took 7 totally new people and had us rowing singles on Lake
Oh, really?
Mercer. It was just 7 of us.
He
So it was,
purposely put the experienced people away to make space for
yes.
new. Oh, really? Oh.
Yes. And the first day of practice, and I write about all this because this is so poignantly different than my second cycle, where because this was the only thing I experienced, I thought it was how things just were, right? Our first day of practice, we get to the Mercer Boathouse, and it wasn't like, and I love asking people because I do public speaking as well. So when I come in and I ask people, like, imagine what your first day with the national team is like. You're trying to make the national team, you know
Hmm.
what you've done in high school or college, or whether you're leveling up from high school to college. What was it like? And people are like, oh my God, you probably rode like so far and did all this stuff. And I was like, we spent the entire morning cleaning and reorganizing the boathouse, learned how to carry a single, learned what epoxy numbers and what resins and all the things you had to mix, how to fix a boat because he literally goes, look around, there's no boatman. If you break it, you have to fix it yourself.
All right.
So our first day of practice was literally 7 people plus Tom. We get there, he's in the rack already moving boats by himself. So again, just like Kevin was in there doing the work with us. Tom was literally moving equipment, sweating, telling us what to do. He was a part of the group, not above or separate from the group. So that was a piece of trust right there from the
Mm.
very beginning. We learned that we had to buy a stroke coach, a heart rate monitor, how to carry the boat, how to fix it, how to take care of it. And then we went and rowed for 20 minutes, and that was it, just to make sure that everything was good with the boat. Then we went home and went to our jobs. So we started with accountability, trust,
Yeah,
teamwork,
ownership. Yeah.
yeah, and of ownership. That's a word that I hadn't have all these
Mhm.
years. I haven't even thought about ownership, but yeah, ownership and like respect for that process that we were these seven people out of all these people that could be here. It was just us. And we started with a low threshold of training that gradually over time expanded. It wasn't 40K from day one. It wasn't 200K on week one. It was literally 4K and then go run. And we did a lot of cross training in the afternoons and had a lot of on our own workouts so that we could go to work and pay for this because no one was footing the bill. It was on us. So we
Mhm.
had jobs. And one of my teammates, here she was, I mentioned Susan France here earlier, and hopefully she'll appreciate that too. Master's from Penn in criminology, and here she was working at Foot Locker because it was the job that would pay her money that worked within our practice schedule. She ultimately leveled up after that, but like we were doing whatever we had. I was stuffing envelopes for $10 an hour
I've
because
done
it
that
allowed
before. That's a decent job,
yeah,
by the way.
it allowed me to sit down when I need instead of being on my feet so I could
I
rest technically between
I'll tell you
practices.
one
Like
just a funny story
yeah,
that
please.
I had like 300 to work through for one day.
Okay.
And I was like, right, okay, just started my work. I didn't know that they were self-adhesive envelopes. So I was licking, I licked every envelope and I got
You like get a
70 deep.
paper
I'm
cut.
like, hey boss, I gotta take a break.
Yeah,
But I
that's
liked it
true.
because you just put headphones in and no one bothered you. So,
Yeah, I mean, you're
uh,
you're just there, and you're doing what you need to do to be able to go back to practicing the thing that you're really doing.
yeah.
Like, imagine the resume you're writing. I'm here training with the national team coaches in hopes of making the national team someday. Here's my education, but I need to be able to work these hours. Can you hire me? Like, who's going to hire me?
Mhm.
So, it all kind of worked out that ultimately we didn't all end up finding things within the local community that worked out with practice. But, I even went back. So to go back to the training of like what we did, when I first started coaching, I went back because I kept meticulous training logs. I have a stack of logs like this, the
Yeah.
heart rates down to what I was eating, not everything perfect, but like, oh, I went and had a margarita at Chevy's. That was a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
Right. But because I kept track of it, I actually could go through and do the math from week to week of what we did, at least initially, in terms of volume. So when I went back to start programming for high school team that I was running at the time, and I saw that we rode 4K on our first day of practice and cleaned the boathouse. Guess what we did on our first day of practice? We went for like a run and we cleaned the boathouse and got to know each other, So
Mhm.
so then doing the math, meaning I tallied up how much volume we were doing each week for the first couple of months. And then I just looked at the percentages. How much did we actually increase? And lo and behold, it fit the science spot on in terms of safe amounts that you can increase volume from week to week over time without plateauing, without getting into injury risk. Once you get up to the volume that fits within your time frame, stop. Don't just indefinitely continue to expand. Know that you need time to recover. And if you eat into your recovery time, no amount of training is going to do you any good. So
Mhm.
there were these really poignant lessons hiding in plain sight. And because I wrote stuff down, I have them now as a coach, which is really cool to reflect on my memory, but also to see
Right.
the written record of all of that stuff. So, you know, um, my brain is really working today. I'm not sure why it's working so well right now. It must be, I appreciate your questions. They're spot on. And I got to spend a couple hours on the water this morning coaching already. So, um,
Yeah.
but even with those volume expansions, it was by the time we got midway through, by December, so several months in, it was more than I'd ever done at that point. And Tom was really mindful. If anyone started to get hurt, he would back it back
Oh,
off
really?
because you just have to go, the dose response. If he starts to notice a trend, he's like, okay, it's wintertime. People tend to get sick. These things start to happen. Let's cross train more. Let's dial it back and not advance. And he was really open about that. I remember having a conversation where he literally pulled us aside and was like, we're going to meet today. We met. He said, I've noticed a couple of you are having some trouble managing the load. So we're just going to dial it back. Okay, until that stops. And then once we balanced out, then we progressed again. It was like, okay, not so fast, bring it back in. Okay. No. And throughout that first year, he recognized the need. At least this is how I read into what we were doing. Maybe it was sadistic. I don't think so. But Lake Mercer. We spent a lot of time in New Jersey our first year training together. And so we took like 2 10-day trips out to San Diego, to Chula Vista, to the now Chula Vista Elite Athlete Training Center. It was an Olympic training center at the time. Um, but so we spent a lot of time with the lake frozen. We spent a lot of time with a foot of snow on the ground.
Hmm.
So rather than just being on the erg, he would send us on adventure runs. And I remember one was like, there's a foot of snow on the ground, run around the lake. And the directives were figure it out and stay together.
Huh.
Didn't matter if someone was super fast. It was like, you must stay together. And so he sent us on this like camaraderie run. And so our question was, oh, is there a path? And he goes, it's a lake. You'll find it. Of course, there must be a path, right? Which there are tons of paths. It was just, it was that happened to have been our first time. So we didn't have we weren't familiar with like how to do it. But since then,
Mm.
we're like, oh, there's all kinds of paths. But there were a lot of times like that where we would go on group runs where the intent was not, let's beat the crap out of each other. Let's go and like win the run. It was, go chat, go shuffle, figure it out, stay together. And that really was another small but very important piece to the trust and the team development and kind of what I call, like I said, it was 7 people. So that was the national team's version of a novice team. And
Hmm.
so we were forming this bond of these kind of like goofy, silly, potentially promising, athletes that had come out of this cluster that didn't get to race at U23s or Nations Cup. We just rode pairs and then went home, right? So basically, the majority of us did. Or we went to after my second national team camp, we went to Canadian Henley. It wasn't like we were racing overseas. It was like drive to Canada on your own, stay in a dorm with no air conditioning, and go race a bunch of races. And that was what it was. But here was this really neat kind of personality that was developing. And because the veterans were not there, we were able to be ourselves and kind of
Yeah.
be the core and develop without being like, oh gosh, am I doing this right? And that's where being a novice in college, oh gosh, am I doing this right? No, you just get to go and like have at it and be young and strike, like just bring something new to the group, like this injection of energy. And then when veterans did start coming back, again, my version of it, like what I saw and what I reflected on was that he brought back the really good ones, just the really good, humble people first. Anna Michelson, right? Megan Dirkmatt, like they were people who were really skilled, had been in the women's eight that took silver in the Athens Games. Anna Michelson walked on in college at the University of Washington. I can't remember if Megan Dirkmatt did too, but she was a Cal, right? So came out of great programs with great coaches that were really humble, hard workers that never once thought they were better than us. And bring those people in. And now you have some experience joining this like youthful exuberance of just like a bunch of crazy people that were like, we like rowing, yeah.
Mm.
And they're like, we're going to show you how to do it. So it was a
Okay.
great merger. Yeah.
So how would you say if you didn't have that situation with your coach in that environment that was created,
Yeah.
maybe someone who's listening or even just yourself in that situation, how do you think you yourself could go into that and help create that environment of kind of camaraderie and competitiveness,
Yeah.
but supportiveness?
Yeah. A friend of mine just maybe a year and a half ago mentioned to me something about workplace psychology. A friend of hers works in, is I guess has a background in psychology, works in workplace psychology, and says that for every negative attitude, it takes 4 positive attitudes to
Oh,
make up for it
really?
in a workplace. Yeah, and I was like,
Is
I
that a
believe it.
study? Is that like
Yeah,
or
I
cool?
personally haven't looked up the study, but that was a conversation she was having with a colleague of hers
Oh,
that
cool.
had the research to back that up. And whether it's exactly 4-to-1, but we know
Hmm.
that in when you're delivering criticism to people, there's a magic ratio. Like you can't just be like bam, 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 bam. You don't want to
Yeah.
sugarcoat everything, but there's like a threshold because I mean humans have a negativity bias. You're going to start thinking you're doing nothing
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
But that 4-to-1 ratio, like the reason I believed it was because I'm like, I've seen this. If you have one negative person in a quad, that quad is not going to go anywhere.
yeah.
If you have one negative person in an eight, they can hide in there, right? It kind of gets squashed to a certain extent. You have
Yeah.
enough people that it can like, especially if those people trust one another already, and so what I would say in that situation is that like to enter into a situation where you aren't necessarily coming up with a cluster and then have that kind of merger of humble veterans with kind of promising new young, exciting, um, is having a buddy helps,
Yeah.
right? Like, and because to a certain extent, culture is going to be driven by the team, by the athletes, no
Mhm.
matter what, whether it's good or bad. And
Mhm.
so for the coach needs to recognize if it's the right culture. You can't not be aware of what's going on with your team. And so you need to make sure that things are in place to either keep negative culture people away from one another,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to put them all the eggs in one basket because then it just becomes a really strong nucleus of not the right culture drivers, but then create space for those people who do have an element that's going to be bringing something positive to the team. Create space for them to develop confidence. So this, I guess, I'm talking at it more from a coaching standpoint,
Uh-huh.
but there,
Okay.
and I'll
Yeah.
come back to the athlete standpoint after I reflect on it from a coaching standpoint. I, as a coach, have come to believe through my own experiences, so now being on the coaching end, is that every person on a team is the best at something that will help that team go
Hmm.
at every level, and there's going to be that person that likes to be first every day, even if they're just sitting there doing nothing,
Yeah.
right? Like, and those things, those little small behaviors start to rub off on other people in really positive ways, especially from a coach if you do notice that every now and again and give an attaboy to the behavior that you
Hmm.
need to drive the culture, because the other stuff will start to happen as a byproduct of these very positive behaviors. And I'll circle back to that too, because that is absolutely something that I say, even at the national team level, we didn't win because we set out to win. We won because we set out to be the absolute best at this thing, trained on speeds that were better than anyone had ever done before, and just kept chipping away at the rocks as we're riding our mountain bikes up the hill,
Hmm.
and every now and again glancing up to the top. But ultimately, you can't control how fast other people are on any given day. And when we went out there just going, well, how do we get a little better every day? Ultimately, whoo, lo and behold, it was better than everybody else on the planet at the right race at the right time with the right medals waiting for us at the other end. But from the athlete entering into a new situation, um, it's real. This is why it's important. An opportunity is hard, but because you might only have access to one team, right? One
Hmm.
sport
Yeah.
experience. Say you're in high school and it's your team.
Yeah.
This is where when someone, for instance, is looking at different schools, colleges, clubs, whatever they're looking at around the country, wherever they are, if they want to go row at a particular place and they have options and could move to different places, is really look at the culture and make sure that it matches you and not, the other end. Start from the front end and make sure that you are able to be your best there, that you are able to put your best foot forward there, and that you're comfortable there, and that you have at least something that's familiar to you that makes you feel comfortable, so that you are willing to show up and bare your soul every day at practice, because that's effectively what you're doing. You are out there laying your heart on the line for this thing and this group of people, and you want to make sure that you're in a place that you're comfortable doing that. If you don't fit with the people, then it's not worth, at least in my opinion, not worth doing it, because you ultimately won't get as much out of yourself. It's not worth doing it in that specific scenario, because you won't get as much out of it, out of yourself in that environment. And that's if there is an
Hmm.
overarching environment that isn't a right fit for you. Um, I guess I realized after trying to unpack that through my talking about it, like, is there a specific scenario that you have in mind that you're thinking about?
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm just thinking about yeah, someone who doesn't have a choice
yeah,
into that, and they're just in a 5% toxic, 100% toxic situation.
yeah,
If you had the
yeah,
chance to
yeah,
sit down with them and talk to them, and I know I maybe kind of trying to come up with the worst situation, and
yeah,
they love the sport. They saw some positives. They had reasons to want to continue, but there's
yeah,
a lot of stuff going on. What advice would you give to them to
yeah,
manage that? And maybe it's not like solving it, but just being learning how to handle it better in a
yeah,
way.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, absolutely. I think that a big piece of it is talking to your coaches at that point. Like
Okay,
if we're talking 100% toxic, if it's a situation where you don't feel comfortable, let's go to the extremes. You know,
yeah.
have, having a very open conversation with the coaches where whatever the situation is, understanding the team's expectations, understanding the
Yeah.
coach's
Yeah.
expectations.
Expectations. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and making sure that what you want like it is matches whatever the expectations
Yeah.
are in that situation. I'm definitely like an athlete minded, like every team that I've worked with that has gotten better, right? So it's like the things that seem to be these patterns are morale goes up, injury goes down, speed goes up. But it never starts with like, here's this massive training. It's what do you guys want to do here?
Hmm.
And that's a really important place to begin. I've worked with coaches that are afraid to ask that question because they're afraid of the answer. They're afraid they might not get the answer they want. And my response is the answer is the same, whether we hear them say it or not.
Hmm.
So if you don't get the collective goal and don't set that from the beginning, then you'll end up in a situation where you're like, gee, is it the training program? I just can't motivate the this or that. It's because
Yeah.
the expectation didn't match on the two ends. But I think t- to talk with the coaches is the first thing. If someone's struggling in an environment or they want to know if it's the right environment for them, what is the aim? How can I, what do I bring to the table? And what are some things that I need to work on to
Hmm.
help toward the group's aim here, toward the team's ultimate goal of whatever the team is doing here? That's important. And if you can find a buddy in the process, someone else on the team that
Hmm.
you do align with, find even one other person on the team that is on board with whatever, if you feel like a culture driver and you see big things for yourself and you see big things for your team, is there anybody else? Make sure you get to know your teammates, learn all of their names,
Yeah.
learn all of their names,
Say hello in the morning when you walk in at 7 a.m. or whatever, and
Yeah,
it's cold and
yeah,
everybody's tired.
yeah. And if one of the things that I love about this sport is that it's like the ultimate cross training sport, you know? Like you run, you bike, you lift weights, you row, you erg. Erging is very similar to rowing, but it's still
Yeah.
cross training, which is why
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
you got to row the erg, right? You got to row well on the erg. Like it's a whole separate topic, but it's a whole separate podcast about the things I see people do on the erg. I'm like, what? Why are we working so hard on our technique on the water and you're coming in here and spending all these meters on the
Yeah.
machine to having at it? What are you doing? Right? It's
Yeah, that was the
similar.
thing. The things technically I got complimented on from other coaches were pretty much always the things that I just focused on the erg. And yeah, we just
There you
see
go.
so many people switching off entirely or not focusing. It's just so many, there's so many opportunities for you on the
Yeah.
erg to bed in some good changes. So
Yeah. We
um
always had to row the erg. Like all the drills that we did, almost all the drills that we did on the water, we did on the machine throughout my career with the
mhm.
national team. But yeah, like the talk to the coaches, know what you want to bring to the table, write things down, journal. Like, you were asking about the confidence piece prior to when you write things down, then you have kind of a record of your own improvement. If you feel like you're getting stuck, like you're like, "Oh, I'm just not making progress." Well, if you're writing things down, then maybe you're
Yeah.
actually not as stuck as you think you are. Or maybe you were sick for a week, or maybe you
Hmm.
missed practice for a week or two. That will allow you to see the consistency over time. That can kind of sometimes let that because we do have a negativity bias, you can have one
Yeah.
bad day and think that you're terrible. Well, if you write it down and you have 10 great days prior to that,
Yeah.
you go, oh, actually, I'm not so stuck as I thought I was.
When I was injured, I had like a 12-month injury,
Mm,
and there was a long point where I wasn't really making any progress. But starting journaling was probably the biggest thing that helped.
mm,
I think the first thing it gave me was recognizing patterns, so I could see, okay,
mm,
long story short, I was squatting, like when I was doing back squats, I was getting injured, so I was able to identify that and cut that out.
mm,
The second thing was I was able to spot progress, and I know like I would be walking and I would feel pain in my back when I was always walking, but then I realized and it was so hard to see the positive side of that in reality. But then I
yeah,
look back at my journal, I'll be like, oh, it was painful even not just when I was walking, but when I was sitting, and now it's only when
yeah.
I'm walking. So you're right. Yeah, the negativity bias is so true. And that's when we're coaching as well. We just do that. let's just look back on 6 months from now. If we told yourself 6 months from now you'd be in this position or entering this race or talking about making this technical change,
Yeah.
how would you feel looking back then? So it's so important that you have to be your own cheerleader is like a big part of it, and why egos can can
Mm.
be so prevalent in the elite end of the sport. So um okay, so did that kind of culture kind of continue with you towards the
Uh-huh.
end of your rowing career, and that was there the whole time?
Um, so first, yeah.
Oh, you
Nope.
you
Okay. Paused you for, I think you got
you
paused.
you
Oh,
pretty
I'm
much,
here.
yeah,
I'm
you pretty
here.
much, sorry, yeah, you could just start that
I mean,
answer
yeah.
again because you pretty much cut out as soon as you started to answer it. So uh
Yeah, no, the World Championships that year. So after that kind of cluster of novice people with the veterans that started coming back, started formulating boats. A quad was formed. The pair and the quad were actually the priority events for that first World Championships, which would have been 2005 for those of you who may or may not have been born at
in
that time.
Japan.
Yes, Japan, in Japan. And so I raced the pair and I was starting pair in the eight that year. But the culture, we went out and did more than we'd ever done. We through most of the racing leading up to that through that week. Our speeds showed that we would potentially medal. And my pair partner Caroline Lind and I got stopped in the hotel one night after we raced our reps as well, like through the middle of the week. And two of the coaches that were there said, you know, how does it feel to know that you're going to win two medals at your first Worlds? And we were like, what? What do you
Two of the
mean?
US ones or just random countries?
Two of the U.S. coaches, yeah,
Right,
two of the
okay.
coaches that, yeah, so, and we were like, "What does that mean? We don't know." We weren't taking anything for granted. I had learned enough in college, and certainly with the national team, to know that you can be almost
Mm.
cut from the team, and when you do not roll over and you find a way, in the words of Kevin, find a way or make one, it gets you through that last little bit. Like I am willing to go to the point that the very first line of the introduction of my book is, have you ever pushed yourself so hard that it made you feel like all of your teeth fell out? Right? Like it's that like and you don't find that on day one. You find that on like day, one day at a time. But we hadn't raced the race yet, and we had learned enough under Tom's tutelage that we weren't gonna expect to medal. We were gonna go out and have the best races we could. And what happened? I mean, we won our rep in the pair by like open water. We went, it was fast conditions, but we went, 6:56 in a pair, and my erg score was a 6:52 at the time.
Wow.
So like, yeah. So it was fast in Japan, but even so, it was like I had literally been rowing for 3 years and went 6:56. But so we went out in the pair and in the eight, and we ended up getting fourth and sixth. So here we were tracking for at least third at minimum in both, and we got fourth and sixth. And we were about this far in the eight out of second place and in fourth.
Oh wow, what a race.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like 5:58, 5:58, 5:58, like the speed
Oh
5:59.
wow.
Yeah. It
Those
was
are close
just
to world
so,
records at the time, wouldn't they have been?
yeah,
Were they
yeah,
world
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The world record at the time was 5:56,
Right.
56 point something at that point. So then that was our '05 Worlds. And the reflection was like, holy crap, we just did more than we've ever done in our entire lives. I felt like crossing the finish line in the eight, and the arm, like down here, my outside arm, Mary, our coxswain, asked for more. We needed to find more. And when I went to push for more, it literally felt like someone came and punched me in the side of my outside, like right in my ribs. And I was like, is that what it feels like to break a rib instantly? But I did not, right? But because of that, how that felt, like it literally, boom, it felt like someone punched me there. I couldn't push as hard on that next to last stroke, and
Oof.
I was like hell bent on making that boat go. And so then we regrouped after a couple of weeks off after Worlds that year, and Tom sat us all down and basically reset the entire intent of things. Was like, okay, we worked really hard. But it kind of came down to two things that we were our mantra basically for the rest of it was preparation equals confidence, and control what you can, ignore what you can't. And that was a very distinct meeting. And we, at that point, started watching a lot of racing from the '04 Olympics, where
Mm.
that was the previous Olympics. We watched, we had a lot of time where we watched other crews that were historically fast. So we started watching the Australian men's pair, the Dutch
Yeah.
lightweight women, the Romanian women. Like we watched a lot of these different teams and took parts from all of them and kind of Frankenstroked them, you
Yeah.
know? And it was like a process of time where we really worked on this element for a long time. And then once we finally got a handle on that element, then Tom would add another element. And it was
Hmm.
always pulling from what someone was doing, and it always defied convention. And you're taught in college, like reach and long arms and all this stuff. And it
Hmm.
was like, well, look, they're not really reaching and their arms aren't really long, but the blade's longer. There were all these things that we were
Oh.
learning historically too. We had a historical perspective on rowing, and then started racing based on, like, even before we broke the world record, it was like, so now we're going to train the speed in the eight was like a 5:53, right? And the world record at the time was a 56. But all of our gold medal standard times, even for steady state, were based on a 5:53, as if we were chasing this elusive thing that was
Hmm.
a boat length faster than the world record at the time. And then we trained like that every day. And we started under GPS became a thing too that year. It was like '05 to '06. So then we could actually track how fast we were going
Hmm.
in the boat with like a Garmin. You could put a Garmin on your shoe, so that instead of having just one of us that had a Garmin on our shoe, we all had Garmins. So then, in my opinion, to this day, the two most important pieces of equipment: how hard am I working, heart rate, how fast am I going, GPS.
Hmm.
Am I working harder to make the boat go faster, or is the boat going faster because of how I'm doing this? And when you have those two pieces of information, you can go get into a single repair and really get a lot faster by knowing, just like, what if I do this right now for the next 20 strokes? Does the boat go faster? Did my heart rate go up? If it didn't, then maybe whatever our technical change was, and whether it was a pair or a
Hmm.
straight four or an eight, okay, that must be helping the boat go faster. What did that feel like? So then you can internalize it and get better at it that way. You're constantly curious about the little tiny things that you can adjust from day to day that can potentially make the boat faster. I mean, you could go out. I remember getting to the point where we were racing 2x6K or 2x8K in pairs in California, and they were stepped rate. So we started at 24, and you knew that if you were at a 24 going X speed and it felt easy, you were like, we are going to win today.
Yeah.
Because you knew how you were so dialed into your effort relative to the boat speed that you're like, wow, this is really fast for how hard I'm working right now. And it's really going to pay us back in 5K. so having those two pieces, so then factor that in, and within a year of that devastating loss of this much in Japan, we broke the world record and won by 3/4 of a length.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. I love hearing your approach and your kind of humbleness, I guess, to learn. Um, Technically, could you pinpoint maybe like one thing that you think was a big breakthrough for you that you guys did as a crew, or maybe the
Mm.
two or three things that you mentioned unconventional as well, so I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there are 380 things. There are,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tell people, I'm like, it's a blueprint, right? So I guess we haven't talked about the better great than never.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll
But
be linking that in the description for sure. I've got it here
but
as
it's
well.
yeah, in my perspective, it's a blueprint, and there are all these things. If you know what you're looking for, it's hidden in there of like, but
Hmm.
from a technical standpoint, you mean like some of the breakthrough
Yeah,
things?
like I was just like I've chatted with a couple of guys in the GB8 that won in Paris, and they talked a lot
Mhm.
about their back end separation, how they're just very
Mm.
deliberate on the sequencing off of the back, and they said spent a lot of time doing that. So, if there was one thing
Yeah.
for you,
Yeah.
can you guys?
I mean, I do joke, but I'm not actually joking. I tell people that I learned how to row 4 days before our Olympic final.
Yeah.
You're having these constant, breadcrumb aha moments. But we actually changed our rhythm 4 days ish
Oh,
before. Yeah, changed the
really?
rhythm. So
That's a
we,
huge thing as well, just to jump in there, but
yeah,
being ready to change and not like I see.
yeah.
Just trying to spot patterns of people that are progressing technically and are kind of staying in the same way. The language I've heard amongst people rowers that stay the same technically are, oh yes, but I've got this trial coming up in 4 weeks or 8 weeks,
Yeah.
or but I had some good speed yesterday, so I don't know if I want to change it.
Mm,
So it's awesome to hear you guys
mm,
were four
hmm
days before the Olympics
Yeah, I
trying to
mean, we had
change.
raced our heat And then we went and changed the rhythm.
What did you
And
change? So what was it you changed?
yeah, so it's actually funny that you bring this up because I was asked a question. Somebody said something like, "Oh, like, at the NCAA level, they're like, oh, everybody's rowing with the gather now because Texas has been winning and they've been rowing with the gather." I'm like, well,
Mm,
Duke started doing that in 2012, which was how we rowed for a long time with the national team. Their coach rowed with us, and she was a world champion in the women's eight. And bring that. Casey Galvanic's been coaching a gather since like '97. There are crews that the Australians have rowed with a distinct gather rhythm for a long time. If you go historically back, watch the men's pair in 2004. It's a
mm,
distinct, it's a good version of a high rate gather, and historic, like this is 20 years ago. And so and if we had better footage at even older games, I'm sure that we would see a variety of rhythms, because one of the biggest things rhythmically that people ask is fast hands or slow hands, right? Like,
yeah.
what do I do? I would say they both serve a purpose, and you have to be really good at using your legs before you can go to the fast hands. But we went from rowing with a gather, a very distinct gather that people get wrong because they accelerate using their arms and their body. They're forgetting that
Mm,
that acceleration is a manifestation of mechanical advantage, right? Like, you're at the catch, you're pushing hard. It's not like you waited. You didn't go, I'm going to wait till the second half of my drive to do anything. No, then you miss out on the first half. So lock the blade in with the legs. Everything's loaded up. I had a collegiate athlete say to me, stored elastic potential energy. I think that was the phrase she
mm,
used, right? Like there's that bend that happens, that lag that happens because of the
yeah.
bend with the initial kind of loading everything up. But the acceleration, but then the exhaling with so that the hands, that the release kind of happens timed with the legs themselves. And in my mind, when I reflect on it, we used the gather to really find each other's uniform leg drive. For years of time, we spent really rhythmically rowing that way, um, because it allowed us to much more easily find each other as a crew, whether it was a pair, four, or an eight, or quad, or double, whatever you're in. And then if you time your hands with your legs, that's much easier than just trying to find the hands. You also get the trust development so that you can go and race in Olympics and then go, okay, if we want to make a change, then the coach knows that we have enough understanding of how to use our legs that we're not going to start forgetting to use our legs. And we trust him and one another enough to make that change and be effective in it. So we went from a gather rhythm to, I could not move my hands fast enough.
Oh
Woo,
yeah.
fastest hands I ever rode with in my
Really?
life. But then if you go look at a very distinctly Romanian rhythm, that is very much how they row,
Yeah.
where everything looks bent all the time, right? Like, they finish the stroke and around they go and the knees pop with the hands. But what that really does is it creates a lightness out of the bow that
Hmm.
then it's like you have no choice but to be really aggressive and fast and strong with the legs, but in like an agile, delicate way at the front end.
Hmm.
Someone explained it many years ago. It said Igor Grinko would say that it's the catch is like a snake bite, right? And
Yeah.
there's a really interesting, this is how my brain works. If you go back um, to, again, the 2004 Olympics, and yes, I've watched the Olympics since, I've watched them a lot.
Yeah. Film.
Every
Yeah.
stroke of every NCAAs for the last four, doing the commentary for all these different races, you watch every stroke of every race. But if you go back to the women's pair in 2004, the Romanian women's pair, they were in the eight, they won the eight, they win the pair, they walk away with the pair. So they double gold medaled in 2004. And if you watch, you get about, it's less than 1,000 meters to go. I can't remember how many minutes it is, and you can just pick it up on YouTube, I think, at this point. But there's a great stern shot of them up close, and you can see how their arms are bent, they're floating, 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 and then all of a sudden, last minute, doop, out the arm goes, blade
Right.
goes in the water. So it's a really great close-up
Hmm.
depiction
I'm gonna look that
of,
up.
yeah, of an effective, because if you go fast hands around, going from the gather, which really I like using to teach people how to really drive the legs and not overwork the back end of the stroke too soon, like really spend a lot of time, like 90% of your time, figuring out how to make the legs, the biggest pistons, super strong and in charge of the stroke. But then that fast hands, once you do have a grasp on the legs, that quick hands reminds you, like, the hands are light, but the feet and the knees and the legs, everything is just up and out of the boat. That is kind of the
Hmm.
sensation that at least I took away from that, was like,
Okay.
wow, I'm done with the stroke. And now this picks everything up out of the boat. And now we're just floating on the seat until you land and get to push again, which is, I think that is the next layer, that when people stop at the gather, there is that next step, but you have to kind of like trust that it's possible, that it could make you
Hmm.
faster. or maybe they're equally as good, but they
Yeah.
made everything it made everything feel lighter, just
Interesting.
overall lighter. Yeah, I Karin Davies, I can't not bring up Karin. Um, Karin Davies was seventh seat in the women's eight in 2004. She rode Port. They won a silver medal at the Olympics. She stroked the 2008 and 2012 eights on starboard and won two gold medals there and won the Thomas Keller medal last year, right? So she was nominated, I believe, four times and won the Keller medal last
Mhm.
year. Karin is very good in the front of a boat, in the stern pair in particular. And she, having a natural rhythm, was also willing to make these technical adjustments, right? Listening to whatever the coach said, that she obviously has this rhythm that helps boats go, but then even then is willing to make this adjustment that will make her rhythm even better.
Mm.
Think something that is really interesting about a stroke seat is no matter how good a stroke seat is, the crew has to trust that that stroke seat is good at what they do. So you have to spend time together in a lot of different lineups and in a lot of different boats, a lot of different small boats day to day to develop that trust. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I know that we're talking forever here, but
No, I love it. I love
it's a
hearing it.
whole there's even more to that too, where
Oh
then
yeah.
let's say as an athlete ages, through
Yeah.
whether you're an eighth, if you start rowing in eighth grade and now you're a senior, you're a different person. If you're college freshman versus, last year there, you're a different person. And certainly with the national team, if people make it that far in their career and then row for 10 or 15 or more years with their respective national teams, you are a dramatically different person. So the hard part is, and here's a question, it's an interesting, is how do you constantly churn through people, just as people age out of the sport, into a system where they're new and don't yet understand that concept that a 23-year-old shouldn't train the same way as a 33 or 38 or 40-year-old because the 40-year-old needs a lot more recovery time
Hmm.
and probably has figured out the rowing stroke at some point in there, at least to a certain extent,
Yeah.
right? But you have to get the 40-year-old, like the trust development still has to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, when I was in the GB team, it was one program for everybody, and I've heard of a lot of programs. I think it's getting more common now of
Uh-huh.
that adaptability, isn't it? But yeah. Unfortunately, we're coming
Yeah.
to the end of time.
Yeah.
I'm wishing that we had more time, and I'm stretched
I got
far
another
more.
practice to go to too. So
Yeah, no, I'm loving hearing it, but of course, this is just a fraction of what you've got in your book as well. So,
yeah, yeah,
highly recommend people to go and check that out, and we'll link it out. Um, but yeah, like love hearing so much about
yeah,
your story. Maybe we need to make space for another chat about the technical stuff or the mindset stuff or
yeah,
more. But Lindsay, thank you so much
yeah.
for
Appreciate
sharing
it.
everything and writing the book as well and taking the time to share so much of your knowledge and um yeah, like really appreciate it.
I realized you said the one thing with technical things, and here I went down a whole rabbit hole. I have a tendency to do that, but
No,
last little
not at
nugget
all.
is something that I guess I should probably mention too. Is in talking about the book, a thing that came up in conversation. So maybe this is more conversations, whether you have them with me or other people. I didn't get hurt the first 7.5 years that I rode.
Oh
Right.
wow.
So I went through the Olympics without any major. I had like one small thing that was like a shoulder irritation and PR'd 10
Yeah.
days later. So a lot of where I've gone in my career as a coach and as an athlete, because I went on and got a master's in exercise physiology to go like, what the heck kept me healthy, and reflected on all that too. So those are pieces too. It's like, how do you do that without getting hurt? Well, it's not as complicated as we think when we start to
Mm. Well,
really reflect on
well, you
stuff.
mentioned rest and recovery quite a lot as well, so I'm
Yes.
sure
Yeah.
that's an element of it.
Yeah.
But
Yes. 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 Yeah.
yeah, it
Fantastic.
helps.
Yeah, fantastic conversation, questions, curiosity. I really
Oh,
appreciate
thank
what you're
you.
doing for the whole rowing community, not just in this conversation, but everything beyond it. So yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. But yeah, cheers everybody. We'll link maybe your social media or your website as well in the bio and in the book for sure. So yeah, thanks so much, Lindsay. And yeah, cheers everybody.